the Big Tech Podcast, in proud association with Magnet Networks, connecting businesses virtually anywhere in Ireland.
Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian, the tech editor of the Irish and Sunday Independent. This week we're talking about smart cities, and thank you to Magnet Networks for sponsoring our podcast. I have with me on the line Jamie Cudden, who's the Smart City Programme Manager for Dublin City Council. Jamie, very welcome to the podcast.
That's great. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Jamie, I want to talk to you a little bit about Dublin, but first when I think about smart cities, I'm never really sure what to think. And I'm sure this is a question that you face a lot of the time. But I went looking at other cities around the world. And one of the more interesting ones that you're probably familiar with is Songdo in South Korea, a $40 billion project where they equipped 106 buildings, 22 million square meters with things like pneumatic tubes to send rubbish straight from homes to underground waste facilities so that there are no garbage trucks driving around the city. Each apartment is equipped with screens and video chats to communicate with neighbours, and there's all sorts of sensors to control pollution and everything. The problem with it is, though, that apparently only a third of the city is occupied because people say that there's none of that organic, vibrant buzz that you get in, conventional cities where bits of it are wonky, and that almost adds to its charm. I'm not sure what my question to you exactly is on that, but I guess what is your idea of a smart city, or what is Dublin's idea of a smart city, and how far down the road are we?
Yeah, great. I think Songdo is I suppose an older example of a kind of a fresh city that's been built from scratch. I think it's a very different situation in Dublin. As you say, we have a pretty vibrant city. Some people call it a messy city, but somehow it works, and it's quite a successful city. And for me, I suppose the smart city concept, it's quite a nebulous concept. As you say, a lot of people have different views and different opinions of what it is. I suppose my definition is I suppose that, we have this emergence of all these new big technology trends hitting us, from a consumer and a personal perspective with our, smartphones, with connected everything. And, you hear all these buzzwords like big data, Internet of Things, and we're seeing stuff like drones and artificial intelligence. So for me, it's there's all this new technology that's creating lots of new opportunities. And then you have a traditional city, it's worked the way it's worked for hundreds of years, and you have all these different silos. And I think, for me, it's how do you take all these new technology opportunities and start to apply them in a way that delivers better outcomes for citizens and community. So it's not really just about the tech, it's about applying it in a way that can actually make a difference. Yeah,
when I think of Dublin, for example, I think of a few projects that have been aired in the past. So public Wi-Fi, for example, was one. There were a few spots around Dame Street and I think Temple Bar, and maybe one or two other areas. There's always stuff around security, around CCTV. That's kind of a contentious area to get into, and we might talk about that in a few minutes. There's things like transport, so things like smart bins, like some of the bins in Dublin that I see now. I'm not sure. I think some of them have sensors to let authorities know when they're full. I'm not sure. You might tell me whether they do or not. They kind of let on that they do, but I'm not sure if they actually do. Is that the kind of stuff we're talking about?
Yeah, I suppose that they're kind of, I suppose, little examples. I think, there's the wider piece in terms of the smart city, and, the likes of the Airbnbs and Ubers and, all the different apps we use to deliver services. And then I guess there's the services that we deliver as a city. I kind of look at it in terms of, as a city, we face lots of challenges, like most cities in the world, everything from how we manage waste to how we manage extreme weather events to how we optimize energy to how we make it easier for people to get around the city, and actually how we engage, I suppose, communities and citizens better. And then when you think about the technologies and what they can do to help solve some of these problems, that's kind of the starting point. And what we have, I guess, is a lot of examples of projects across the city that are applying technology. And I think the smart bin is probably a good example. We work with a company called Big Belly Bins, but a lot of those bins are quite innovative in terms of they compact the waste by up to 6 times. So that they're more efficient. And if I go on my phone now, I can click into the Big Belly app, and I can see in real time all the levels in those bins and when they need to be collected. And our waste management teams then use that to optimize collection. But because the waste is compacted, they don't have to do the collections as often. So there's less people driving around, less plastic bags used, and it's just a much more efficient way of doing it. But not only that, like I used to think just a bin was something that we use to collect waste, but then you can start putting public information on the bin. You can advertise local businesses on the bin. Who would have thought it? But you can also then, because there's power on that bin, you can put other sensors in that bin that can help monitor the environment, look at the number of people passing the bin to see if the bins are in the right places, and then you can start using the data analytics to optimize where the bins are, etc. So it's quite exciting in terms of something as simple as a bin can be a lot more. And in our Docklands, we have kind of a pilot with 120 bins, and we're looking at innovating, all the different ways you can use those bins. We've even got a bin there now that has Wi-Fi delivered off the bin, off the solar power, which is quite innovative as well.
So that what? Well, what's the purpose of the Wi-Fi? Is it a public Wi-Fi hotspot? Is that what
public Wi-Fi hotspot. So it's actually being powered by the solar.
I'll come on to that in a second. Do you happen to know how many bins there are in Dublin by any chance? I mean, there must be a few thousands. The volume, the number of bins, public bins.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure the exact figure, but you're right. Yeah, there's a couple of thousand. I think we have about of the smart bins. We probably have over 350, something like that at the moment.
And are they the ones that I referred to earlier? I think there's one on Amiens Street where there's a kind of a handle that comes down and it and so there are 300 of these, because I'm just trying to anybody who lives and works in Dublin. One of the most common sights they see every week is just an absolute stuffed full bin, and stuffed to the brim. And then there's the helpful citizens who decide to perch and balance stuff on top of the bin, just for extra, gaming for the bin collector. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's any ambition to fully replace all these bins with smart bins?
Well, I think there's some areas where these type of bins work well, where maybe there's possibly, I think along the Sandy Bend, we have quite a few of those bins because during the weekends and stuff would be very busy during the summer. So they can compact. You don't need to collect the waste as often. But when you have a concentration of the bins in an area, that's when it works.
And are they expensive? Well. Do you happen to know, are they expensive to put in?
Yeah, I mean, there's two options. I mean, you this is what we're kind of looking at. You can purchase the bin, or you can buy the bin as a service. So there's all these different innovations happening.
When you say you, do you mean the city, the Dublin City Council?
Yeah, the City Council can do that too. Yeah.
How much does a bin go for these days?
Well, I think a standard kind of big belly bin is probably, I'm just trying to think about the cost. I mean, it can be anything from about 5,000, 4,000 or 5,000 euro. Depends in terms of what you have in the bin. But that's obviously, it's compact. That's got lots of features in there that helps optimize collection. So we've done a whole cost benefit analysis on.
So if you were to replace citywide, or even say between the canals, if you were to replace the bins, you could potentially be looking at a couple of £1 million.
Yeah, but then there's other options that we're looking at. You can actually hire these bins and pay. I think it's about something like €100 a month per bin, which is a much more which is kind of an effective way of using the technology, and then that is less of a hit. But I think there's always going to be a need for just traditional bins. I mean, there's people looking at putting sensors in traditional bins. I mean, it's all about the data and making sure that these are in the right place, that they're optimized, that they're enhancing the environment as well. So it's a kind of an emerging space. It's probably one of the big use cases, I guess, in smart cities globally, is like, how do we use the technology to manage waste in more efficient ways? Is
there anything that has caught your eye in terms of being kind of imaginative or exciting in terms of the smart city rollout? I mean, I'm thinking, for example, this time last year, there was a demonstration of a driverless shuttle that ran for a couple of kilometres or along the North Quays. And that's something that kind of catches people's imagination. From your perspective, looking at all these technologies, we can talk about smart bins or public Wi-Fi, but is there anything that really looks quite futuristic that might come into our purview in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's the big opportunity, is that these technologies. If I talked to you a couple of years ago and said, we're going to see a massive expansion of Internet of Things and connected devices, and maybe would have mentioned 5G, and you would have said, what is that? We're starting to see these technologies hit the streets like fast. I think we've quite a number of projects. The type of stuff that I look at from a city perspective is actually all these new technologies. They're coming fast. How does the city respond? Because we tend to have silos, and we tend to have policies and regulations that are quite restrictive in terms of how we embrace new technologies. I think a great example, just to illustrate the power of technology, would be the the scooter or the bike. And a couple of years ago, you put a GPS and a device on it, and all of a sudden it's a service, and you see companies like the scooter companies worth billions of dollars kind of scaling out these scooters in cities around the world.
And
Yeah,
companies
and
like
I
that.
think we're worth $1 billion companies in the space of a couple of years, and you're seeing these scooters being dumped on streets, and of course, I mean, it's a huge opportunity there in terms of certainly you could see that replacing cars in the future.
Well,
And more
that's if we allow them in
Yeah.
Dublin, because right now I've looked at this issue for the last 18 months, and it's, as we talk now today, it still seems, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the status quo still seems to be that they are regarded as motorcycles. You're not allowed to use them in bike lanes. You have to have insurance and tax and a license to use one, even though I see hundreds of them, ordinary people using them. And I know that a couple of TDs have taken the cudgel up and are trying to get legislation through to put them on a more legal regulatory footing. What's your understanding of that?
Yeah, so I mean, so you can look at lots of different types of technologies, and the technology is ahead of the regulation or legislation. And I think e-scooters is a great example of, even if we wanted to roll them out in the city, there's legislation nationally that we have to change. And I think some views would be quite negative. I mean, I personally think there's a huge opportunity with this type of technology, and as a city, we need to be thinking about, well, actually, it's definitely something that's going to be here for the long term. So how do we address some of these safety concerns? How do we make sure the regulations don't stymie it to a degree that we can't use them because there's too much regulation and they make it difficult? It's a bit like, I guess, the Dublin bikes. If everyone had to I suppose wear a helmet, and we had very strict regulations, would as many people use the Dublin bike? So we have to think carefully in terms of how we regulate these things, because at the end of the day, if it can add value to the city, address our climate ambition, it's something we certainly should be looking at. So I know there's a consultation at the moment, Department of Transport. I think it's until the 1st of November. So I'd encourage people to kind of give their opinion, and hopefully we can have a considered response to it. But certainly, what we see, and we've got a couple of collaborations with tech companies and startups locally. The issue with the scooters is probably as much where they get left, and making sure they don't block the pavements, as well as, I guess,
a pain.
the safety.
I mean, you've seen this, I'm sure, that as I have. It's mostly in American cities, but now actually in European cities as well. They are being left all over the place, and it is a bit of a pain in the neck.
Absolutely. I mean, there's 15 companies operating in Lisbon, for example, and they can't be left. So it's interesting enough that what we start to see is actually the technology then needs to adapt, and these companies need to work more closely with cities and people like myself, to say, well, actually, if you had a better piece of technology that would have better precision on the GPS, you can actually control exactly where the scooter is left. Because at the moment, the GPS devices on a lot of these devices, the accuracy is probably a couple of meters in some cases. So what you really need is centimeter precision, and we're working with the.
How would that change where the scooter's left? How would that change someone dumping it just on the path?
Yeah, so I mean, you'd have defined areas where they would have to be left, and if you're within a couple of centimeters outside that box, you'll actually be fine. So it's kind of nudging. Yeah. It's nudging behaviour through the technology. So we were actually working with DCO Alpha and a couple of companies, amazing Irish companies, that are hoping to be one of the first globally to launch this low cost technology. And I think that's kind of the exciting thing in terms of how can we shape this to make it work for a city and apply technology and create new economic opportunities locally as well.
I have spoken to Free Now, which is the company formerly known as My Taxi, and a couple of months ago I interviewed their Irish CEO, and he said that they definitely have an ambition to launch electric scooters or electric bikes in Dublin.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the second license for the stationless bikes, the company that's got that, Moby, actually, they're hoping to roll out electric bikes in the next month or so. And I've seen the bike; it's actually an amazingly cool electric bike. So I'll be very excited about that. But also Leaper Bike as well. We've tested some of their new electric bikes. I think the electric bikes is going to be another game changer as well. So, and I think what we're starting to see is that there's huge opportunities with all these new technologies. And I know we're talking about e-scooters at the moment, but the similar, you talked about the autonomous vehicle.
Yeah.
The reason we brought that bus to Dublin is because we just felt like that, people hear about all these technologies. They don't quite realize how real they are, because they're quite insulated here in Ireland sometimes. I don't mean that in a negative way, but maybe people need to get out and see what's happening in other cities around the world. Because
do you think, I mean, I've been saying on this podcast for a while, and I've been writing for a couple of years now, I think that autonomous vehicles are absolutely going to happen, whether it's sooner or later. I actually thought it would be, we would almost have seen the first tests in European countries, in Ireland or UK by now, but I still think it's going to happen in a few years' time. What do you see coming down the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, I mean, Dublin is a complex city at the best of times in terms of its roads network. So, I mean, if they can work in Dublin, they can work anywhere in the world. I see probably that the first phase would be more controlled kind of test environments. I know Jaguar Land Rover are doing some interesting work in the west of Ireland. And I think, we'll probably see the level of automation increase. We're even seeing it with the new cars, with the functionality and features. But from a city perspective and from a national perspective, it's kind of thinking about the future. And if we're investing in new motorways and investing in, we're actually got a big project at the moment to upgrade all our street lighting to LED across the city, and to smarten that those kind of controls that you can remotely see how the lights are functioning, and the whole thing is connected. But the idea is, certainly this, as you upgrade infrastructure, you need to think about 5-10 years down the line, because those street poles could be good geo-reference points. I mean, street poles could even be good docking stations for drones in terms of what we're seeing down the line. And I know, so we're talking about autonomous vehicles, but also drones. I mean, the speed at which drones have evolved, and that industry over the last number of years is phenomenal. And even in the city council, people wouldn't believe, if I said to you 3 years ago that within the city council we have multiple teams working with drones, you'd probably laugh at me. We have our fire brigade working with drones and first responder incidents, where you can stream data live back from hazardous incidents or surveying tall buildings to have a better idea of first response. You've got the surveying teams in the council surveying buildings and sites using LiDAR. You've also got waste management using the drones around Halloween with the fire brigade to look at where people are building up stacks of tires for bonfires. So you start to see this technology, it's coming much faster than anyone has ever imagined. So you start thinking about the big question now globally is for cities in terms of who manages the airspace above the city, because this is going to be a very dynamic piece in terms of delivery drones, in terms of first responder drones, etc. So we need to be thinking about our regulation and make sure that Ireland and Dublin's at the forefront of this technology evolution, and not always kind of sitting back and thinking, oh sure, it'll never happen. I mean, it's happening now,
Well, there's two ways of thinking about drones, sure. So the examples that you've just mentioned are kind of connected with civic control, security, law and order, monitoring where things are, monitoring if things are getting out of hand. It's surveillance, actually. It's a kind of a more dynamic, flexible way of just keeping tabs on things. But the other element is actual delivery and service. So you've got Bobby Healy, the car trawler entrepreneur, who has his Mana company, and that he's done a deal with Flipdish to try to deliver fast food using drones. You've got futurologists like Amy Webb in the States, I haven't interviewed yet, hope I will, who predicts that city planners will have to change the way they think about cities. To your point about, lampposts, etc., because she believes that drones will play a huge part. But she thinks that drones, it'll be the private sector where most of the drone action will actually happen. That what you're talking about will be the small minority of cases, health or safety, security. So do you think, how far is Dublin in terms of realising that potential future to regulate drones, for example? I know that's the Irish Aviation Authority predominantly that is in charge of that, but does the Dublin City Council have any say in that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it comes back to a lot of the technologies that we're going to see hitting cities fast over the next couple of years. We need to. It's not the city that can we can influence it, but it's national regulation and policies that for autonomous vehicles, for drones, for all these things. So we need to work, and we need to make sure there's dynamic teams at a national level that really get the fact that we position ourselves as Innovation Island. The IDA do a good push and all this, but if the companies don't see the city and Ireland kind of lead the way in some of these technologies, I think we'll be left behind. So there's probably the first innovation is in the R&D and making sure that our R&D programs and the test beds are there to kind of encourage the first phase of innovation. Now, there's so much.
Well, the companies are coming through. So I mentioned Bobby Healy's Manor, for example. So that is a company. He has funded that company. It is there. It wants to do it. So I guess what that company and maybe other companies like it, they are waiting for some sort of encouragement or green light or roadmap from authorities, be it the Irish Aviation Authority or be it, or even statements of intent or programs from the likes of Dublin City Council.
Yeah. We have a partnership with Maynooth University. They have a big drone collaboration. Airbus are involved, so we're working closely with them. I mean, there's all sorts of complexities. I mean, we're looking into this at the moment in terms of microclimates, in terms of how you model the way microclimates work in cities, the wind shear, the impacts of different buildings. It's actually very, very complicated. When you go beyond line of sight, it's still a lot of work and proving out to do on these technologies, as is the same with the autonomous vehicles. I mean, if you talk to Uber would have thought autonomous vehicles would have been, their business model was on the fact that they were going to have autonomous cars out on the streets. It takes a bit more time. I mean, I think that's the big disconnect I see in the smart city industry, is that you have a lot of companies get investment from Silicon Valley based VCs, but they don't talk to governments and cities in terms of actually how they're going to realize their applications. And in fact, cities are much more complicated. And I think that's why cities need people like smart city teams or innovation teams to actually be that interface between the technology and the city, because otherwise you're going into the silos and it's like, let's just not do this. And what my role and the Smart City team in Dublin City Council and the Smart Dublin team regionally is trying to do is trying to bridge that conversation and figure out, what the things are that we need to do, and then lobby, I suppose, central government to wake up to the fact that, maybe these things are important for the future of Ireland and our kind of reputation.
Okay, well, I'm going to watch this space with interest. Jamie, thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
Great. Thanks, Adrian. Bye-bye.
And at this point of the podcast, I'd like to once again thank Magnet Networks for being a sponsor. And I'm delighted to say now we are joined by Dr. Zoe Purzol-Fagor, who works in Maynooth University and who has done an awful lot of research into smart cities. And in particular, you have looked at the effects and the data around the importance of buildings in smart cities. Is that right?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. First, I would like to say hello to all. And yes, my research has been around the smart city and also with the concentration on building information and how we can use them to create smart services for smart cities.
And has anything interesting come up in that research? Like when I look around, for example, at areas of a city like Dublin that are being built at the moment, I see large apartment buildings, office buildings. I hear from officials in the government, in the Department of Communications, who say that buildings have to now have minimum ducting facilities for things like broadband, but I don't hear that much else from them in relation to what a smart building might be or the building blocks therein. What has your research thrown up in terms of what we're doing right or wrong or what we need to do?
Indeed, my research has been to make the building information available to other industries to let them create new services to the cities. I will just bring one simple example. For instance, utility companies are providing energies to the buildings, and it is important for them to know, for example, how much is the energy consumption for this building, and then based on that they can plan for the infrastructure for that area. This is one of the very simple examples. And if you don't mind, I want to bring to the attention of everybody to know why we need to look after this infrastructure and all of these resources and things. Because they're thinking that, oh, we have the resources and infrastructure, that's okay. And the main aim of Smart City is using information communication technology to provide these services. And what's the problem then? I want to say just an important fact that I heard also. It's that it's about urban population growth. It's very clear to everybody. I think there is a prediction that about 70% of world population will be accommodated in the cities, and therefore we need to provide such services to more people. And that's the thing, but the infrastructure and resources are the same. Therefore, we need to think about how we can use the same resources and provide smart services.
Yeah.
And that's the point. And statistics is showing that we have a lot of waste of energy, waste of food, and waste of many of different resources. That's the fact.
So what can... I spoke to somebody earlier about the example of a city in South Korea, Songdo. I'm not sure if you're aware of this example, but this new city, or a far suburb of Seoul, where they spent $40 billion on it. They threw up over 100 buildings, and it's an entire smart ecosystem. So what they did was, they put in things like pneumatic tubes to send rubbish straight from the apartment to underground waste facilities, so that they wouldn't have to have as many rubbish trucks like driving around, or collections, etc. And a lot of that kind of stuff. Are there any lessons to be drawn from any of your research on what to do better?
What I can say is that we need to aware people about what's happening around them, and we need to do some changes in population behavior. And for example, we started to think how we can use smart services to let students know about student accommodation in different universities, for example. One example is that, for example, we have some sensors on the windows and we have radiators on. When the window is open, somebody should let them know this is waste of energy. And this is one example of smart service. We are moving toward that way to increase awareness of people about all of these things, all of the resources, all of the possibilities, and how we can have a good smart city. That's the fact.
Yeah. When you talk about open windows, of course, in Ireland that would be true. You're letting heat out. In a lot of other cities, though, opening a window sometimes is not a bad thing in terms, because it gets too warm naturally in the building. What do you think is going to happen in future? Do you think that we are going to move closer towards smart city infrastructure, or do you think that it's that cities and construction companies and planning authorities will always gravitate towards the most cost-efficient method of doing something?
This is a very difficult question to answer indeed. Of course, every organization is thinking about more benefits. But from the other side, I know that, of course, cities should move toward this approach. Otherwise, it's not possible. For example, in some projects, European projects that at the moment we are involved, we are trying to think about positive district energy. And it means that these areas of the city for the moment, only for this project, are going to produce energy and extra than their needs for the building. And rest of this energy is going to be stored in utility for the city, utility storage, energy storage for the city. And then it can be transferred to other areas. That's the new approach. Of course, we need to survive. And in this reason, all the ongoing researchers and things, they are thinking that how we can create new sources of energy first, and second, how we can increase awareness of citizens about the way that they should use energy and the way that they should use resources. Because the resources are for all population of the world.
Yeah, no, for sure. On that note, we're going to leave it for today. My thanks to you, Dr. Zohra Purzol-Fagor, and my apologies as well, because I think I identified you earlier on as being from Maynooth University. You are, of course, attached to the School of Computing in Dublin City University, in DCU.
Yes, indeed.
So my apologies for that. But thank you very much for coming on the show today. And thank you also to Magna Networks for sponsoring this podcast. That is all we have time for this week. I'm Adrian Weckler, the tech editor of the Irish and Sunday Independent. And until next week, bye-bye.
The Big Tech Podcast, in proud association with Magna Networks, connecting businesses virtually anywhere in Ireland.